The Ole Miss season last year ended in heartbreak. We all felt so much for Jackson Dart, throwing those interceptions and not having his best day against that Florida Gator football team. This year, they're looking to turn it all around and get into the college football playoff in what would have been a college football playoff appearance had they won just that last game of the season against Florida. All the work that they did at that home, incredible performance against the Georgia Bulldogs, blowing them out. Kirby Smart saying that that's the best defensive line in college football. Y'all got to get down on the sidelines, college football playoff committee, and see how good that team was. I'm very high on Ole Miss. Have them as the number 10 team in the country next year. Austin Simmons takes over at quarterback. Princewell Uman-Mielen, the transfer, the younger brother of Princely Uman-Mielen, who's now an edge player for the Carolina Panthers. Well, they get the younger brother and hope for a similar level of production. Suntarine Perkins, 10.5 sacks a year ago. They hope to regain a lot of what they had in the D-line last year. Of course, they also no longer have Jared Ivey and Walter Nolan, who was a first-rounder to the Arizona Cardinals. Offensively, what will they be without Jackson Dart and with Austin Simmons? Well, let's break it down, the 2025 preview and predictions for Ole Miss. Week 1, they're against Georgia State. Start the year off strong, a 36-13 win. This team is built on transfers, as I mentioned, a couple of them, but on offensively specific, they have some of these older guys, Deshaun Stribling, Harrison Wallace, there's Caleb Odoms, Traylon Ray, like a bunch of these guys that they brought in as transfers and hoping for production from. We're just wanting to see a little bit more out of the tight end spot. Can Daquan Wright have a good year for Ole Miss? We know all of that production, how great Trey Harris was a year ago. The running game, of course, wasn't going to be the same without Quinshon Judkins, the all-SEC player, the 36th overall pick in the draft a year ago. But the offense was still moving the ball down the field without him. Last year, can they get the run game going? Because that is what it will take when they get into their bigger matchups. Week 2, it's against Kentucky. I need to mention this. I feel like I need to. Is there 4 first games of the season all not going to be stressor type matchups, like where you're like, man, this is just from the first play of the game. That's how you do need to approach it, though, so you don't have an upset loss. Kentucky 31-10 have Ole Miss winning. That we know how that game against Kentucky last year went for the Rebels. Deion Walker on the outside, Maxwell Hairston goes as a first-round pick to the Buffalo Bills, but a 31-10 convincing win for Ole Miss this time around. Arkansas, week 3 with Taylon Green. Landon Jackson's no longer there. He's also a Buffalo Bill. There looks to be a bit of momentum at this point for that Ole Miss offense. Maybe Suntarine Perkins has got a couple sacks in this matchup against Arkansas. 29-20, Rebels take care of business, and at this point would have themselves ranked as number 10 in the country, being 3-0. I would imagine that a lot of teams are 3-0 or even 4-0. They get a 4th win, 34-17, and I believe would be surprised if they're not 10 in the country at this point with a 34-17 win. Thing is, though, what will guarantee a spot in the top 10 is if they can beat my number 9 ranked LSU. I say my because I mean my ranking is number 9. Not that I'm an LSU Tiger fan. Goodness, no, I'm not. I do like some guys on that team, like Harold Perkins returning. So we get the Perkins versus Perkins week 5. Harold on one side coming back from that horrible injury against UCLA last year, against Perkins of Ole Miss, who ends up being the better player, who maybe rises their draft stock a little bit as far as the Perkins conversation goes. But Simmons versus Nussmeier, of course, there's advantage for Garrett Nussmeier in this game, a very good receiving core, but I have Ole Miss winning this game. It's at home. Likely this is going to be a crazy, wild environment. They have the opportunity to go 5-0 and beat Brian Kelly. It's going to come down to this type of game. A matchup against LSU, beating a South Carolina. There's Florida. There's at Georgia on this schedule. You can't expect to beat all of those, but if you only wind up with something like 2 or 3 losses, you give yourself a chance to get into the playoff. 5-0 heading into the bye, ranked in the top 9 or 10 in the country before they play Washington State. Well, we know that John Mateer's no longer there. I have Ole Miss getting to 6-0 on the year. Don't be fooled, though, by the 6-0 and getting all full of yourself. There are still such tough matchups left. You get to 6-0, and then you're staring down the gauntlet of at Georgia, at Oklahoma. How is any of this fair? That's just ridiculous. And then South Carolina. Yeah, we get to play Lenore Sellers at home. We get to see a top 5 defensive player in the country, most likely, in Dylan Stewart. Like, what are we even doing here with the SEC schedule? This thing is just crazy. It cannibalizes itself every year. And most likely through those weeks 6 through 9, there's going to be cannibalizing. And you might think there could be 9 SEC teams in the playoffs. There's likely only going to be 4 or 5. Last year, there were only 3. When we talk about the SEC just eating itself every single year, but with being so deep. So a win against Washington State, 6-0 before they head to the Dogs. Have Gunnar Stockton being better than people expect him to be. Why? Because they can rely a little bit on Nate Frazier in the run game. They can get the ball out of his hands quickly to the playmakers like Dylan Bell, the transfer in Zachariah Branch. As a defense, they're obviously not going to be the same without Michael Williams, without Jalen Walker. Nobody has to debate that there's no Malachi Starks roaming around the middle of the defense. They don't have Smile Munden, who ends up getting drafted by the Eagles of all places. What a great selection. 5th, 6th round pick, Smile Munden. Absurd. 17-24, have the Rebels losing their first loss of the year, but it doesn't end there. They lose again to Oklahoma and John Mateer, 31-23, giving up a lot more points than they would like. Oklahoma and John Mateer are going to look like a different team maybe other week, besides the fact that John Mateer is going to be scrambling. I think we could see games where he might have 176 yards throwing the ball, but like 105 rushing. Like, his production on the ground is very underrated. A lot of individuals haven't been speaking about it. For those that have followed him or did see him at Washington State last year, like, what the heck? Like, that many touchdowns, 15 rushing touchdowns, absurd stuff. They lose to Oklahoma after 6-0, drop to 6-2. I know the sky might be falling, but understand this. Your season's still all out in front of you. If you can just beat South Carolina, and I have them doing that, beating South Carolina 33-27 in an absolute classic. Austin Simmons, Lenore Sellers. This is a spectacular matchup of 2 of the younger quarterbacks, guys that are leading these programs forward into this new era without having, of course, Jackson Dart, the first-round pick quarterback. Is very hard to replace that level, and we know in South Carolina, my gosh, that defense. Nick Amanwari coming up on that defensive side of the football. Like, they just had TJ Sanders. I mentioned Stewart. He's obviously still on the team. Kyle Kennard, who was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. They were tremendous, and just like Ole Miss, a lot of those guys are gone. They get a win against Oklahoma. They get a win against South Carolina. Big win to get back in the win column, 7-2 before a matchup against Citadel. That's nice to have a bit of a breather before you play Florida at home. Have them winning 46-11, moving to 8-2 on the season. This is the same thing as last year. A win. It looks like you're just gonna roll through that bye week to Mississippi State, be 10-2, locked into the playoff, but have them losing to DJ Lagway and the Florida Gators, led by Billy Napier, 30-22. My question is, does Ole Miss get into the playoff in this scenario where they lose 30-22, get beat by Florida once again, and it appears it's all over? They beat Mississippi State. Is 9-3 good enough for them to get into the playoff? Ole Miss, what is necessary for them to is beating who I have it laid out to beat. Like, you got to beat South Carolina if it comes down to a tie-breaking type scenario. Ole Miss beating LSU, of course, that's going to be a large component of it. Mississippi State, no one is doubting that they're going to get that matchup winding up in a victory. But overall, just looking at this thing, can they steal one more? Of course, you're going to take beating South Carolina, who's improved and people know about now compared to last year. A lot of people were like, South Carolina, they're just not a team in the conference. They've elevated themselves last year from tier 3 into tier 2 in the conference, and LSU, same exact thing. They've been in tier 1, tier 2-ish for like the last 20 years plus in ongoing things. So let me know. And 9-3 for Ole Miss, the year with Austin Simmons. He'll be back in 2026. Lane Kiffen has had this team right. He's done such a phenomenal job as a coach. It's evident that he loves being down there in Mississippi and enjoys being their coach and has this program in a great direction, that they're going to be competitive. They can get great transfers, that they can develop and bring in, foster talent that is in the form of good recruiting classes. Like Ole Miss is the spot where you can build it out. Like Lane Kiffin went down there and is changing the culture around. But let me know in the comments what you think about what I put together here. You have to remember that I am not filming this right next to where you're watching it. I filmed this video a couple weeks prior to when you are watching it, because I'm going to Africa in a couple of weeks to be watching and seeing the Great Migration there in Tanzania, which obviously, if there's some injuries that come up, impacts the authenticity of what this video is in the sense of it being true. Obviously, I'm being authentic, talking about the players that are going to be on the field to my expectation, but obviously don't know if injuries or that type of thing come up to prevent guys from being on the field. And I obviously could have spoken about them being on there, so that is why, because it's a couple weeks before any of that happens. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe for more content. It would be incredible if you could join this community. Just trying to build this thing out, fired up to just be posting every single day for the college football, for the NFL season. It is the best time of year, and it's right around the corner. Stay tuned for more coming out in the future, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you.
Best player in college football.
That Georgia and Ohio State game, New Year's Eve, is going to be a classic.
Josh Blunder, hi everybody, I'm Josh Blunder.
To the 40, 35, 30, Espinosa to the 20.